Hello guys, and welcome to yet another Blackrock Foundry Mythic Guide by Method. Today we're going to be talking about Oregorger, or as I like to call it, Oregorger.
Yeah, I'll call it Oregorger though, which is most likely what most people are gonna call it.
Right, so this is probably one of the easiest fights in the whole instance. It's instantly accessible. You can either go to Gruul or to Oregorger, depending on what you like and prefer.
For Oregorger, you're gonna want to take 2 tanks, 5 healers, and 13 DPS, which can be both melee or ranged. Doesn't really matter how many melee or range you have, but you need 5 interrupters at least for some cast that you have to interrupt on the boss.
Yeah, the classes don't really matter that much. You can bring whatever. So, starting off with the positioning for this fight. There are different ways you can position the boss, but we just keep it simple and, no shenanigans. Just keep the boss where he is at the start. And the melees go behind him. You keep the boss facing the same direction that he is facing before you pull him. And then the range split into 2 groups. Half on the right and half on the left in front of the boss. As you can see in this video, every time that something spawns on them, they just move backwards a bit. That's it. Pretty simple. Nothing else to say about the positioning.
Yeah, Oregorger is a 2-phase fight, so it's not that hard or complicated. First phase has some abilities in the second phase, and we'll go over the first phase first.
Yeah, there's something special about this boss. He has the phase 1 and phase 2, as Druid just said, and he does also have an enrage, which is dependent how many times he switches between these phases. The thing is that the DPS requirement for this boss is not really that high, so you don't have to worry about it, and we can't really say when exactly the enrage happens because it depends on how fast you transition him into phase 2, which you kind of control in this fight.
Yeah, you don't control how long the phase actually lasts because you just want it to last as long as possible, which will give you the maximum amount of time. You don't really want it to go fast because it'll just lower your DPS and things like that.
Yeah, and we're talking about phase 1, you want to make it last as long as possible, and phase 2 as short as possible, basically. But anyways, moving on to the abilities in phase 1. First ability, and the one that makes you move throughout the phase 1, is called Wretched Blackrock. And what it is a bolt coming from the boss, targeting a random ranged player. And it will leave a pool underneath that player, which you have to move out of. That is why we have this positioning, as we explained before. You can even do it into one ranged group, but that means that everyone has to move every time a Wretched Blackrock is casted. This way, only half of your ranged DPSers and healers, which is very important, have to move, which means that the other half DPSers can keep DPSing, so increase your DPS, and you also have some healers standing still and healing. Now, if you're unlucky and you get all of the Wretched Blackrock spawning on players from one of the 2 ranged groups, you might have to adjust because you run out of room. You can't keep moving backwards, you're going to hit the wall. And you don't want to block the path completely, which will make things in phase 2 harder. So what you do is you move either left or right, depending which group you are. And keep in mind that the healers don't have line of sight to the tanks and melee DPSers if you do so, but the DPSers can still DPS the boss. So an idea is for the healers to, instead of moving there, they can just move into the other ranged group.
Next ability is mostly for the melee, which is Explosive Shard. Oregorger will throw an Explosive Shard on a random melee player, not the tanks, and usually that's of course behind the boss. The advice is to have one melee group standing all together, so when he throws the shard, the melee will notice, because if you get hit by it or you're near it, you get knocked up. So when you notice that, you move to the other side, like the other leg, go from left to right and continue doing that. Because if you stay close to the shard, it's going to deal damage and you're going to be stunned for 3 seconds. So you want to avoid that stun at all costs because it'll just screw you over if you do that.
Yeah, the next ability is the Blackrock Barrage. Basically, it's just a cast that the boss does that is interruptible, and you want to interrupt it because it just deals AoE damage to the whole raid. And this is actually one of the things where, as we explained before, you control how fast the boss loses his energy. If he gets a successful cast off and it's not interrupted, he's gonna lose 5% of his energy, so you get into phase 2 faster. But you don't want to do that. You want to make sure you interrupt all 5 of them. And they're going to be back to back. Basically, in order to make sure you have the cooldown ready for each interrupt, you want 5 different interrupters assigned for each one of those casts. Now, there is something special that can mess it up a bit, and that is that the boss might do other abilities, which are also a cast, in between those 5 Blackrock barrages. And because it's only a short cast and you need to react fast to it, you might have the case where, oops, I interrupted it, but it wasn't the Blackrock barrage cast. And that means I cannot interrupt the next one. So pay attention to that, and a good advice is to have backups. So instead of assigning one player to the number 1 cast and one to the number 2 cast, etc., you just put 2 players there. So there are 2 people, and if both fuck up, then too bad, but that's not going to happen.
Now for the last 2 abilities in phase 1 are Acid Maw and Acid Torrent. Acid Maw is a dot that he applies when he attacks the tanks. There's not much to worry about it, you're not going to tank swap for it, and it's just some nature damage extra on the tanks, so just ignore that basically. And the last one is Acid Torrent. This is the main raid damage that's going to be taken by the ranged DPS in this fight and the tanks. Now when he casts Acid Torrent, the tank wants to use his personal cooldowns or external cooldowns to reduce the damage as much as he can on himself, because the more damage he reduces, the less damage the ranged DPS is going to take. Not just damage reductions, but also absorbed work. So like if you have a Brewmaster Monk guard is really good, or a Disc Priest giving the tank a shield, those are really good tools to reduce the damage. Now every time the tank gets hit by the initial hit of Acid Torrent, which is going to be the closest target of the boss, and it always targets a ranged, so you need to be between the ranged and the boss, you're going to get a debuff. This debuff will increase the damage taken by Acid Torrent by a large amount. So this is why you tank swap after each Acid Torrent, and the next tank will take the other torrent after that. Now because he always targets the ranged and it's a cone, the off tank has to go behind the boss or next to the boss so he doesn't get hit by the other Acid Torrent to avoid a lot of damage and unnecessary damage that you don't need to take.
Yeah, Acid Torrent can really drop your raid super low, and combined with a Blackrock Baraz failed interrupt can actually kill the whole raid. So it's really important that you have that survivability cooldown and your active mitigation up when the cast is finished. If you don't have a cooldown ready, then you need to ask for one, either from your healers or your DPS warriors or red paladins. Alright, so once the boss actually reaches 0 energy, he will go into phase 2, and in phase 2 he stops attacking the tanks, and everyone can basically move around the room. And there will be the ore crates which spawn all over the room. Now what you need to do is to split up your raid into 4 different groups and assign those 4 groups to the 4 corners of the square in the middle of the room, and basically they are in charge of that area around those corners. Now the boss in phase 2 does one ability and one ability only, and that's Rolling Fury. So he's gonna roll into one of 2 directions, either to his left or to his right. He will never roll backwards from where he just rolled. And if you stay in that roll, you're gonna die. So make sure that you look around where the boss is and where he might be rolling to next, and don't get caught into his path. And he's gonna keep doing this Rolling Fury until he reaches 100 energy again. And the way he does that is by eating up the ore that is on the ground. Now, in order to have that ore on the ground, you need to kill the ore crates. So all the DPSers need to focus on killing those ore crates as fast as possible. Even though you can still DPS the boss, it's better to get this phase done as fast as possible so you can go back into phase 1 and maximize DPS that way, instead of trying to squeeze in some DPS in phase 2.
Now we assume you've done this fight on heroic, so you should know how the boss rolls, and he goes towards the ores that have been freed from the ore crates. There's also something new in Mythic this time, which is unstable slag residues that he leaves behind every time he hits a wall. These are the red eggs that you can see on the ground in this phase 2 here, and once he hits them for the second time, they are going to explode and spread fire all around. So it's like playing Bomberman, basically.
Yeah, it's like lava waves that go into all directions, but they never go through walls. So if you're behind the wall, they're never gonna turn like the boss does with his rolls. So you're safe if you're behind one of those walls.
Yeah, the most safe spots are behind the walls on the outer edges, but it's also dangerous to be there in case the boss might roll there. So you gotta keep an eye on where the boss is, and there's fire coming, you can go behind. But if the boss is close by, you might have to take one wave. It's not going to kill you, but don't try to take everything, because that's going to kill you.
Yeah, basically prioritize avoiding the Rolling Fury first, and then also try to dodge the fires. Now, a good idea of how you want to handle phase 2 in general is to first focus on killing the ore crates that spawn in the inner square of the room. And because the boss, as we said, is going to prefer to roll into a direction that has ore on the ground, that means that the boss is going to basically do a full square around the middle, and he's never going to do his longer rolls around the back. And once you've killed those 4, because there are only 4 crates in the inner square, you can move on to killing the other ones, and then you know that he's gonna start rolling all the way in the back from the room and make the big square circle. That makes it easier to know where he's gonna roll in general, so you're prepared mentally, and it's not always like a toss-up.
And the last thing in this phase 2 is that the boss gains Hunger Drive. Every time he rolls, he'll get a stack which increases his damage done, and because of the nature damage he does every time he hits the wall, this is going to increase over time. So you don't want to be sitting in phase 2 forever, because if that was possible you could just kill the boss while he's rolling. You don't need tanks at all, for example. So you want to get phase 2 done as soon as you can, so you go back to phase 1, and then once the boss is at 100 energy, you take the boss where he stands, and then you face him clockwise, so the range takes the new positions, depending on where the boss is.
Yeah, depending how fast you're done with phase 2, there might still be some wretched blackrock on the ground that haven't despawned yet, but they will pretty quickly. So just keep the boss where he finishes his Rolling Fury and assume that those wretched blackrocks are gonna despawn, and just position yourselves normally just like the first phase 1. And once you're done with that phase 1, you're gonna get another phase 2, and once you're done with that phase 2, the second phase 2, you're back into the third phase 1, which is the last phase. Because once the boss reaches 0 energy for a third time, instead of doing his phase 2, just gonna start casting some AoE damage that just wipes your raid in a matter of seconds. So that's basically the end rage.
Now as far as debuffs go for Oregorger, there is 2 debuffs in this fight. First one is Acid Torrent, which is for the tanks. This is the application you get once you soak the initial hit of Acid Torrent. And the second one is Acid Maw. This is the dot debuff that he leaves behind. You don't necessarily need to track it because you're not going to do anything with it, but if you want to know how many stacks you have, you can track it.
Right, so that's the whole fight. Now, pretty simple, few tips and tricks to help you out. First off, as we said, in phase 2, generally what will happen is he's gonna do the inner circle, as we said, and then the outer circle, and around that time he's probably gonna reach 100 energy. And probably at the very end of phase 2, he's gonna run into one of the eggs that he has spawned before. And what that means is that you're gonna have a chain reaction, because once an egg gets destroyed and the firewalls start moving outwards, they're probably gonna hit another egg, and then those fires from the second egg are gonna hit a third, etc, etc, and it basically is a chain reaction. So at that point, it's a good idea to hide behind those outer walls and avoid all of that fire, because there's going to be a lot of it.
Now the last tip we have for this fight is to use a weak aura or some other add-on to track interrupts. It's really important that you kick the proper cast, and if you fail a cast, that the next guy knows that he has to kick, because if you lose the order, phase 1 is going to last a lot shorter and you might lack some DPS in the end then to make the berserk, so to say.
Yeah, if you've seen our Heimel guides and you've seen our Margok Mythic guide, you might want to use that weak aura that we used there for the interrupts, so you know the guy before you, if he has used his interrupt and if he has failed it or whatever.
And that's it for Oregorger. We hope you can get the fight done pretty fast, and good luck.
Yeah, as always, leave any feedback you have on the comments below, and remember to subscribe for more Blackrock Foundry Mythic guides.